I have written another article for New Eastern Outlook. It is titled, Why Washington's Plans to Turn Taiwan Strait into Hellscape Are Fundamentally Flawed. And you may have heard of this comment made by a US military leader about how they're going to turn the Strait of Taiwan into a hellscape using all sorts of unmanned systems, aerial drones, maritime drones, submersible drones, and they're going to hold up Chinese forces for up to a month before the US and all of its allies can mobilize their forces and go to war with China. And this comes from the Washington Post. This is the article that I'm ultimately citing and going through in my article. The U.S. military plans a hellscape to deter China from attacking Taiwan, but a top U.S. military commander for Asia says time is running out to put the plan in place. So let me just read the article, and then I'm going to go into additional context when and if necessary. The Washington Post, in an opinion piece by Josh Rogan titled, The U.S. military plans a hellscape to deter China from attacking Taiwan, lays out a fundamentally flawed assessment of a U.S. Department of Defense strategy relying on unmanned systems to fight off the Chinese military for up to a month before the U.S. and its allies can mobilize their armed forces. And even as the Washington Post attempts to sell this strategy as plausible, it itself calls into question the window of opportunity in which it can be implemented and actually succeed. So, first of all, let's talk about not how flawed this strategy is, but the flawed premise upon which it is built. Before even examining the flaws of the strategy itself, it must first be pointed out that the entire premise upon which this strategy would be utilized, defending Taiwan, is entirely flawed. And I've got over this many times, and I will continue going over this because this is at the root of US-Chinese tensions over the status of Taiwan. This is the official State Department website. This is their webpage titled U.S. Relations with Taiwan. It couldn't be any more unambiguous. It says, we do not support Taiwan independence. We do not support Taiwan independence. Period. It should be period. But because they're playing a double game, they have to mix everything else in there about the American Institute in Taiwan, how it maintains unofficial relations with Taiwan. Why are you maintaining unofficial relations with Taiwan? If it's not independent and you don't support its independence, that means it is a dependent of another nation. That nation is China. The government of China is the People's Republic of China in Beijing. That is what the one China policy of the United States actually means. So I get into all of that. Let's get into all of that. The U.S. State Department on its own official website, which I just showed you, titled U.S. Relations with Taiwan, unambiguously admits we do not support Taiwan independence. If the U.S. government does not recognize or support Taiwan independence, by implication, Taiwan is a dependent of another state. According to the United States' own one China policy laid out in the 1972 Shanghai Communiqué, that state is China, whose sole legitimate government is the People's Republic of China, the PRC. In the 1972 document, it explains it in detail. And here is the document. And the link to this will be in the video description below. And you could read the entire document yourself. But the section of interest says, the United States acknowledges that all Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintain there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of China. The United States government does not challenge that position. Neither does the United Nations, neither does any other nation on Earth with a one China policy, which is virtually every nation on Earth. Thus, any interaction between Taiwan and the rest of China is a matter of Chinese internal political affairs, amid which the United States has no ability to interfere in accordance with international law, and more specifically under the UN Charter and its guarantee of a nation's territorial integrity and political independence. And the UN Charter, it's important to look at these primary sources. Here it is. The link to this will be in the video description below. This is what it says, unequivocally. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. Quite clearly, Washington's unofficial support for separatism in Taiwan, in contradiction to its own agreements with Beijing regarding the status of the island province, is a violation of international law to begin with. any plans by the US to use any kind of military force, including unmanned systems, to create a hellscape in the Strait of Taiwan, to intervene in China's internal political affairs, begins from an entirely flawed, indefensible position under international law. But besides that, it's simply not going to work anyway. So I get into that next. Why a drone hellscape will not work. China has a multitude of ways to deal with US-sponsored separatism and other violations of Chinese sovereignty over the island province of Taiwan. Beyond an amphibious invasion, US military planners envision their drone armies fighting against and somehow winning. Despite Washington's political capture of Taiwan's local administration, the island's economy is heavily dependent on the rest of China. This is why it's really important to look at exports and imports. So this is from Harvard University's Atlas of Economic Complexity. This is for the island province of Taiwan. The vast majority of its exports are going to China, which includes Hong Kong, by the way. Almost half is larger than any other single export partner. And obviously, most of its trade is within Asia altogether, not the United States, not Europe, not even the US, the rest of North America and Europe combined. In terms of imports, the rest of China still serves as the largest source of other imports. And a lot of these imports, as I'm going to explain here, are essential, including raw materials required for the island's extensive semiconductor and electrical component industries. And these are the largest industries on the island province of Taiwan. By simply cutting trade, Taiwan would cease to function as a viable economic entity. Combined with the blockade enforced by Chinese military aviation, submarine forces, and its own large drone capabilities, Washington's hellscape strategy of employing drones to stop an invasion that never comes is rendered moot. But what if Chinese military forces engaged with US drone capabilities in and around the Chinese island province of Taiwan? The Washington Post op-ed claims there are some public signs the hellscape plan is making progress. In March, the Defense Department announced it would spend $1 billion on a program called Replicator to build swarms of unmanned surface ships and aerial drones for this very mission. So they're citing a U.S. official who said the Replicator program shows that the United States is also learning lessons from the Russia-Ukraine war, where Ukraine has innovated with drone technology, but is losing. So you're learning from someone who is losing. Are you learning the right lessons, or are you just going to do exactly what Ukraine is doing, which is lose? The timeline for delivery of these systems is unclear. If the drone swarms aren't ready when the attack comes, that could raise the prospects of a protracted conflict that would incur heavy losses on U.S. naval and Air Force assets and would likely expand to include allies such as Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, according to most war game exercises conducted at U.S. think tanks. And I'm pretty sure at the end of this article, I include one of those war games, which gives away the whole game that the U.S. is playing with Taiwan. And it's not to protect Taiwan. It's not to help them win a war with the rest of China. It's not to deter a war. It is specifically to provoke one and expend Taiwan in the process of raising the costs for China to win. This is after the Washington Post cited U.S. Naval Admiral Samuel Paparo, the new head of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, who refused to provide details of the plan but claimed it's real and it's deliverable. The Washington Post citing Ukraine was particularly ironic, considering the drones sent to Ukraine by the United States and its allies have failed to produce results. This includes an array of larger, longer-range strike drones like Turkey's Bayraktar TB2 drone, but also smaller kamikaze drones like the US manufactured Switchblade. The drones Ukraine has utilized most effectively have either been bought from China or are made from parts sourced in China. In a rebuttal to Washington's hellscape plan, published by Chinese state Global Times, that is this one right here, and I'm pointing out that Global Times is a Chinese state newspaper, so just consider that when assimilating the information that you get from it. Hua Shijin points out a number of very obvious but apparently omitted factors by Western media promoting this strategy. He points out that China is capable of manufacturing more drones for cheaper, faster, with better capabilities than the United States. Considering the reality on the ground in Ukraine, where the little success Ukrainian forces have had in drone warfare is owed not to drones developed by US arms manufacturers, but Chinese-made drones modified by Ukrainians for military purposes, his conclusions are far from just bluster. So it is a state-owned newspaper, but what he's saying is obviously a fact. It is obvious to anyone with eyes to see it. Another factor omitted among US talk of war with China in and around the island province of Taiwan is the distance the US must travel to show up on the battlefield in the first place. Separated by the Pacific Ocean, the US must travel thousands of miles to reach the Taiwan Strait and surrounding areas. While the US maintains a network of military bases across South Korea, Japan, and now the Philippines, the US must still supply these bases from US territory, and US forces must still travel hundreds of miles to reach the Taiwan Strait, whereas Chinese forces are already there because it is China. Fighting any sort of war against a nation with a larger population, larger industrial base, a larger military industrial production capacity, and a comparable military force, and doing so right off the coast of that nation, just like the idea of defending Taiwan from China while officially recognizing Taiwan as part of China, is entirely irrational and doomed to fail before any such conflict even begins. There is no doubt regarding the US military's capacity to create death and destruction. However, its ability to find victory amid the swath of chaos it has cut around the globe is very doubtful. US, in many ways, has many more advantages amid its proxy war with Russia in Ukraine than it would fighting China right off China's own coast. And yet it is a proxy war the US and its allies are still losing. It is difficult to assess the capabilities behind Washington's Hellscape strategy, considering no part of it has been made public, and considering how poorly the US military has performed in recent years elsewhere around the globe. It could be that US military weakness has forced Washington to resort to a blowfish strategy, inflating itself to convince an adversary it is much larger and more powerful than it actually is. A blowfish also employs spines and even toxins to serve as further deterrents. However, in nature, many species have evolved to see past the blowfish's deception and work past its spines and toxins to make an easy meal of it. China, too, is likely capable of seeing through Washington's bluff and working past the thorny spines and toxins, metaphorically speaking, of course, Washington is using to convince Beijing upholding its sovereignty over Taiwan isn't worth the trouble. It must also be remembered that Washington's goal isn't actually to defend Taiwan. It is to raise the cost as high as possible for its inevitable full reunification with the rest of China. The island province being irreversibly destroyed amid the fighting suits Washington much more than sizable percentages of its population, industry, and infrastructure finally and fully joining with the rest of China. The US government and arms industry funded think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in a January 2023 paper titled "The First Battle of the Next War, Wargaming a Chinese Invasion of Taiwan," would admit, after wargaming a possible conflict between China and the US over the island province of Taiwan, that, and this is a quote, "The US and Taiwanese success in frustrating the Chinese invasion is tempered by the extensive damage done to the Taiwanese infrastructure and economy." Basically, it will be scorched earth, but at least the Chinese invasion of its own province failed. This, it should be noted, was CSIS's best case scenario. It is perhaps this final point that those on Taiwan itself should consider most. China is clearly prepared to pay any price to preserve its sovereignty and territorial integrity, as any nation would be. Washington has repeatedly demonstrated it is fully prepared to completely expend its proxies for its own benefit. Those on Taiwan must see the real and only decision they have, either reunification or annihilation, and annihilation deliberately engineered by and for the US, not by Chinese policymakers, but instead specifically to spite them. And that is the end of my article. And I had debated whether or not to break this off into another video. But again, right after I wrote this article, there was this US arms deal with Taiwan, sending them 1,000 drones. So maybe we should just go look at that. Taiwan to acquire more than 1,000 armed drones in US arms deal. Wow, that sounds like a lot of drones. That sounds serious. What's China going to do with against all of these drones? Is this part of the Hellscape strategy? Is it going to augment the Hellscape strategy? CNN says the United States has approved the $360 million sale of more than 1,000 small armed drones to Taiwan, as the self-ruled island claimed by China aims to strengthen its asymmetrical warfare abilities with an eye on successful tactics used on the battlefield in Ukraine. Again, Ukraine is being fed feet first into the wood chipper of proxy war against Russia. It is being destroyed, its population annihilated, its territory stripped from it. What success? Explain to me what success. Now, had I broken this into a separate video, I would then again go over the status of Taiwan and how it is admittedly a province of China. China has sovereignty over it, and the United States is interfering in the internal political affairs of China. And it's so much worse because the US actually has troops stationed in Taiwan, and this was all something that they were able to do over the course of history. There was a civil war in China. The side that the US had been backing fled to the island of Taiwan. They declared themselves the government of all of China. The side that won, the Communist Party of China, said they were the sole legitimate government of all of China, and it just sat there like that. And of course, the mainland China almost certainly would have wiped the remnants of the civil war out from Taiwan and reunified Taiwan with the rest of China, but the US stationed thousands of its own troops there. It had a military base on Taiwan. For years and years, until 1972, they agreed with China to withdraw all of their troops and to eventually stop selling weapons to the administration on Taiwan. But of course, they have completely violated that agreement, as you can see, and they continue to do it even right now with this arms deal. So let's just leave it at that for now. What drones is the US selling to Taiwan? What lessons is Taiwan learning from Ukraine that they're going to apply? It's so bad. Let's just get into it. So CNN says Taiwan will receive 720 Switchblade missiles. They're not missiles, they're drones. They even have a picture of it right here. That is a Switchblade right there. And they have different versions. Some are bigger and smaller. They have, you know, their nomenclature reflects how much explosives are packed into them, the size of the payload that they carry, the size of the drone and the payload that they carry. So it's not a missile. Taiwan will receive 720 Switchblade drones, it should say, and accompanying fire control systems worth $60.2 million, according to a release from the U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency. The U.S. will also provide Taiwan with up to 291 Altius 600M loitering munitions and supporting components with a price tag of $300 million. So fewer drones, higher cost. You may or may not hear the name of these drones and say that sounds familiar, but these were drones that the United States has already sent to Ukraine. Right here. February 24th, 2023, the Biden administration announces additional security assistance for Ukraine. Right here, Switchblade 600, and right here, Altius 600, and a bunch of other drones that you've never heard of and will never hear of because they all went to Ukraine and they completely failed. But that's not me just saying that. That is the Western media saying that. So here's the Wall Street Journal. How American drones failed to turn the tide in Ukraine. So again, what lessons is Taiwan learning? It doesn't seem like they're learning any lessons. It seems like they're making the exact same mistakes Ukraine made. Becoming a willing proxy of the United States, who should have knowledge that the US is incapable of helping them deter or win a war with the rest of China. Drones from American startups have been deemed glitchy and expensive, prompting Ukraine to turn to alternatives from China. The irony here is just off the charts. This is what the article says. The Silicon Valley company Skydio sent hundreds of its best drones to Ukraine to help fight the Russians. Things didn't go well. Skydio's drones flew off course and were lost, victims of Russia's electronic warfare. The company has since gone back to the drawing board to build a new fleet. and we're still waiting. Regarding Switchblade specifically, this is what the Wall Street Journal says. Less than a month after Russia's expanded invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the Pentagon approved the supply of Switchblade 300 drones from the Virginia-based defense contractor AeroVironment. The Switchblades faced initial challenges with Russia's electronic warfare systems, according to a former U.S. soldier who worked with the drones in Ukraine. And again, when was the last time you heard anything about Switchblade drones of any kind? The first batch, the latest batch. When have you heard anything about Switchblade drones operating in Ukraine? I haven't heard anything. China's DJI has proven to be the go-to drone brand for Ukraine's military. DJI said in a statement that it tries to restrict the use of its drones in the war, but can't control how the drones are used after they are purchased. And often they're being purchased elsewhere and sent to Ukraine. And both sides are using DJI drones, and both sides are making drones from components sourced from China. And that is the vast majority of these small improvised drones that you see. That's what they are. Russia also has a large and growing fleet of drones it itself manufactures. We'll get into that in just a moment. Why are they all turning to DJI? Because they're infinitely cheaper, simple, easy to modify, to add components onto, to use in a wide variety of ways. And even if they get jammed, if you lose them, it doesn't matter because they're so cheap you can just buy more of them. When you're talking about, again, going back to the prices of these Switchblades and Altius 600M drones, we're talking millions and millions of dollars for the amounts of drones that either Ukraine or Russia could make in a single month. This is a one-time arms deal with Taiwan. The equivalent drones, well, I'll get into production numbers also here in just a moment. Let's just go back to the CNN article. 720 Switchblade drones at the cost of $60.2 million. That works out to about $83,000 per Switchblade drone that doesn't even work, or may not work. 291 Altius 600M drones at $300 million works out to about $1 million per drone. Let's compare that to the Russian Lancet, because the Altius 600M is a kamikaze drone. Switchblades, those are kamikaze drones. The Switchblade is comparable to these FPV drones that we see. The Altius is kind of somewhere between the Lancet and the Garand 2. The Garand 2, a much longer range kamikaze drone than either the Lancet or the Altius. The Lancet having a shorter range than the Altius, but it's just infinitely cheaper. So let's go to the Kiev Post. I mean, as pro a Ukrainian source as you can find, but even they will admit to the capabilities of the Russian Lancet. Russian Lancet kamikaze drone in Ukraine, an overview. The Lancet has been considered to be a dangerous smart weapon. Each drone costs $30,000 to $35,000. It can easily destroy or put out of action multi-million dollars worth of tank, artillery pieces, or air defense systems. The Garand 2 has a much longer range than the Altius 600M, which, again, the Altius 600M costs about $1 million per piece. Let's go to the New York Times this time. Ukraine keeps downing Russian drones, but price tag is high. When costly missiles take out cheap drones, the real winner over time may be the country that spends less. The whole point of these Garand 2 drones is to exhaust Ukrainian air defenses. And they do also occasionally take out targets of strategic value. This is what the New York Times says. The Iranian-made Shahed 136 drone that Moscow has increasingly been relying on since October, this is a January 2023 article, by the way, are relatively uncomplicated devices and fairly cheap, with an array of weapons used to shoot them down out of the sky. Can be much pricier according to experts. The self-destructing drones can cost as little as $20,000 to produce. That's actually cheaper than the Lancet. While the cost of firing a surface-to-air missile can range from $140,000 for a Soviet-era S-300 or $500,000 for a missile from an American NASAMS, and then even more for Patriot missiles. So not only are Russian Garand 2 drones cheaper than this US-made Altius 600M, It's also cheaper than all the air defense systems that Ukraine is being given to shoot them down with. And that is the whole point of using drones. They're cheaper, so you have many more of them. It doesn't matter if you're losing large numbers of them, if just even a few get through. That makes all of the difference. And again, the few successes Ukraine is having, even if they're strategically meaningless, it is often owed to drones that they themselves are making, again, from Chinese-sourced components or Chinese drones bought from China, sourced in China. But because the US military industrial base is profit-driven, they are incapable of adopting a model of extremely low-cost, simple, and in large quantities. They want to sell smaller quantities of much more expensive systems to maximize profit. And that's what all of these companies are doing. Anduril with the Altius 600M and everything else that they sell, and AeroVironment with their switchblades that don't work. Here is an interview by Bloomberg of Anduril's founder, Palmer Luckey, and he admits the profit-driven nature of the industry that he's in and the company that he's founded.
Right now, Anduril is very much in a high-growth stage. We've done a lot of things that I'm very, very proud of, but I'm very aware of the fact that we are not a profitable business. We are living on borrowed time, and so it's hard for me to come and feel like I've made it when I know that anyone can raise money from VCs, buy a really big office, and fill it full of people. The question is, are those people building the right things, and will those things pay off?
And in addition to this flawed premise of constructing your military industrial base around a profit-driven incentives, Palmer Luckey is also laboring under a false geopolitical premise. This is what he says. This is the supposedly political motivation behind his company and the reason why he wants to build weapons.
The war in Ukraine, it's been 2 years now. How are we going to look back on it?
Well, I think that we're going to look back on it as one of the best examples of the hubris of the modern era, thinking that we lived at the end of history, the end of conflict, that large-scale war was a thing of the past, that artillery is irrelevant, that manpower is irrelevant, that sternly worded letters from the United Nations mean anything at all to expansionist dictators like Putin or Xi.
But of course, in reality, Russia and China are not expansionist powers run by evil dictators. They are reacting to expansionism. We just can look at the expansion of NATO after the Cold War, right up to Russia's borders, and we can look at US military bases surrounding China closer to Beijing than they are to the continental United States. So this gives us a little bit of an idea of why the United States has these overpriced drones that they're incapable of making in large quantities, and why they're trying to offload them on Ukraine and also on Taiwan, even though they don't work. It is so people like Palmer Luckey can turn a profit. It's not actually because they believe it will help them win any sort of war. And the wars that they are trying to win are wars they themselves provoked. So let's talk, we talked about price. Chinese drones, infinitely cheaper than Switchblades, Altius drones. Russian Lancet and Garan 2 drones, more capable, much cheaper. Let's talk about quantities. We talked about price, let's talk about quantities. Obviously, if your drones are much cheaper, you can make many more of them, which again gives you a distinct advantage on the battlefield. Let's look at this Forbes article. Russian volunteer group claims to make 1,000 FPV kamikaze drones a day. 1,000 drones, kamikaze drones a day. Taiwan in a single one-off arms deal is going to get many less than 1,000. And these are arms deals that take place maybe once a year, every other year, and Russia is making this many per day. This is what the Forbes article says. Some Ukrainian sources previously claimed that Russia is now making 40,000 FPVs per month. So you're getting 720 Switchblades in a one-off arms deal with the US. That's what Taiwan is getting. When Russia is capable of making thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of drones, FPV drones, every single month. How many do you think China could make every single month? More, much more. What about the Altius 600M drone? Taiwan is going to get 291 of these. Let's compare that with the quantities of Lancet and Garan 2 drones that Russia is producing. And then remember, China would be able to make many times more over the same period of time. We have this article from Forbes, and this is how you can tell that Forbes is extremely fanatically pro-Ukrainian, even to the detriment of objectivity. Ukrainian attack may have crushed production of Russia's deadliest drone. And they mention possible monthly production rates, but I just want to lay this to rest. Okay, so this article was February 2024. This is May 2024. Russia ramps up strike drone use on Kharkov front, Ukrainian artillery crew says, and both of these are about Lancet drones. Okay, so this Forbes article from earlier this year is saying maybe Lancet production has crashed. And then this more recent Reuters article is admitting that Lancet attacks are higher now than ever. So anyway, let's get to the production numbers. Lancet strikes from roughly 25 per month at the start of 2023 to almost 50 in March and April, rising to a peak of 135 in July. The number in August was similar at 126, but since then, rather than surging, Lancet numbers sagged. September and October were in the 50s, a rally to 89 in November, before falling back to 59 in December. So between 50 to 100 are being used per month. Let's just take the lowest number here, 50. That gives you up to 600 Lancets per year, versus 291 Altius in a one-off arms deal with Taiwan. And that's the lowest end number. It's obviously much higher than that because in certain months, the number of strikes is higher than that. What about the Garan 2? It's larger, it has a longer range than even the Altius 600M that the US is selling to Taiwan. Surely it's not being made in huge quantities that dwarf this 291 number that the US is selling to Taiwan. Let's go to this Washington Post article right here. August 2023, inside the Russian effort to build 6,000 attack drones with Iran's help. Leaked documents show that Moscow is progressing towards its goal of mass-producing UAVs it could use to pummel Ukrainian cities. And then fast forward to today, they have used these drones to severely cripple Ukraine's energy production. They've also depleted Ukraine's air defense systems. This is what the article says. In the past 3 months, Russia has attacked Ukraine with more than 600 of the self-detonating Shahed 136 drones, according to an intelligence assessment produced by Kiev in July and obtained by the Post. That works out to about 200 Garan 2 drones per month. So in 2 months, Russia will have far more Garan 2s than Taiwan's administration will be receiving Altius 600Ms in this one-off arms deal. And again, if this is the rate of production Russia is capable of, the production in Chinese factories of drones of similar characteristics will be many times greater. And people might say, well, Brian, you're just saying that. You know, we are the United States. We are the arsenal of democracy. Nobody can compete with us. Didn't you see what we did in World War II? But here's the reality. This is Voice of America. This is U.S. government-funded media. World's largest drone maker expands in U.S. amid rights abuse allegations. And so, as the U.S. has done with everything else China does, when they are having success, when they're vastly outcompeting the United States and Europe, the U.S. accuses China of some sort of abuse or some sort of security threat and then bans everyone from buying their products. But in this article, it reveals the scale of Chinese drone production. It says, headquartered in Shenzhen, China, the company was founded in 2006. DJI, also known as Datiang Innovations, has become the world's largest drone maker, having achieved global dominance in less than 20 years. The company now supplies 70% of the world's consumer drones and nearly 80% of US consumer drones. So 70% of the world's consumer drones, no other combination of companies can even come close. That is a majority of consumer drones. This is just Chinese-based DJI alone. It accounts for 70% of all consumer drones sold around the world. And that probably equals out, because it's very hard to find production numbers. You could only find the amount of money that they're making every year. But it has to be in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even more. That's just one company in China. So imagine Chinese industrial production churning out any number of drones, the vast quantities they would be capable of producing. It would make 291 Altea 600Ms and 720 Switchblades look like a dot on the screen. You wouldn't even notice it. It would be drowned by the quantity of drones China itself would be capable of producing and utilizing in any sort of US-provoked war over Taiwan. What is the bottom line here? What does this tell us about US foreign policy towards China and its island province of Taiwan? This administration that they've installed into power on the island of Taiwan, are they genuinely interested in defending it against any sort of attack from the rest of China in a war that breaks out with the rest of China? Are they genuinely interested in deterring any sort of conflict with the rest of China? The answer is no. They're selling irrelevant numbers of overpriced drones that are proven ineffective on a modern battlefield up against combat systems that China and Russia both possess in vast quantities. Combined with the industrial output of China and the number of drones they would able to use to counter these tiny quantities of useless drones the US is selling to Taiwan for millions and millions of dollars. What does this actually tell you about US policy? They are exploiting the fear they themselves have created, the division and fear they themselves have created within Chinese territory upon the island province of Taiwan. They are not trying to deter a war. They are not trying to enable the administration there to win a war. They are trying to provoke a war. That is what they are doing. And this is exactly what they did in Ukraine. They admitted it. The Rand Corporation in 2019 in their paper Extending Russia said explicitly, arming Ukraine will provoke a war with Russia, and that war may overextend Russia. And they're alluding to a Soviet-style collapse. But they also warned that any war provoked with Russia using Ukraine, using arms shipments to Ukraine, is going to cost Ukraine. It will end in a defeat for Ukraine. They will lose a disproportionate number of lives. They will lose territory, and it could even end in a disadvantageous peace. That is what it said in the paper. And that is likewise the plan for Taiwan. It is not to protect Taiwan. It's not to help them win a war, deter a war. It's to provoke a war in an attempt to drag China into a war the US hopes they can use to isolate China, contain China, overstretch China, hopefully collapse China. That is the plan. That has always been their plan. That is their plan to this day. So I hope that puts this arms deal into proper context. We continuously hear about how the administration in Taiwan is learning lessons from Ukraine. But if the lessons that they've learned result in them buying outrageously overpriced drones that are proven ineffective on the battlefield in Ukraine, and they're still intent on provoking a conflict with the rest of China, then they have obviously learned absolutely nothing. I will keep an eye on this. This is the next massive conflict the US is trying to engineer. They're trying to provoke a war either between Taiwan and the rest of China or the Philippines and China. I will keep a close eye on this, as well as continuing my coverage of the proxy war in Ukraine. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check out the video description below for all the other places you can find and follow my work. Highly suggest people follow me on Telegram. In the video description, there are all the links that I referenced, including the article that I read, as well as for ways you could help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of the social media platforms that I'm on. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or even if you have no extra resources and you're just sharing my work with others, that is all greatly appreciated. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.